The cruelest bargains are never sealed with strangers, they're signed by family. Before the first hint of dawn reached the pine-covered hills, Ethan Bennett pressed a trembling hand against a faded parchment spread across the scarred oak table inside a forgotten trading lodge near the border. A single lantern flickered between him and the silent representatives of Blackwood Pack, its golden light reflecting off polished silver coins stacked neatly beside the contract. The weight of those coins seemed heavier than honor itself. Outside, a cool autumn wind whispered through the towering evergreens, carrying the distant cry of wolves greeting the fading moon. Ethan never looked toward the small farmhouse resting less than half a mile away. He couldn't. If he did, he might remember every promise he had ever made to the little sister who believed he would always keep her safe. Claire Bennett had no idea that while she slept beneath a handmade quilt their late mother had stitched years ago, her future was quietly changing forever. She dreamed only of ordinary things. She dreamed about repairing the old greenhouse before winter arrived. She dreamed about gathering apples from the orchard behind their home. She dreamed that maybe, someday, the neighboring packs would stop treating her family as unwanted outsiders. She had spent years believing kindness could survive even where pride ruled. She never imagined kindness could be traded away by someone she trusted most. Ethan lowered his eyes as the oldest envoy slid the parchment closer. Once the sun rises, the elder said calmly, the agreement cannot be undone. Ethan swallowed hard. His fingers tightened around the worn leather cord hanging from his wrist, the last gift their father had given him before illness claimed his life. For a brief moment, regret flickered across his face like a candle fighting the wind. Then he thought about empty grain bins, unpaid debts, and the creditors waiting inside their own pack. He convinced himself there were no other choices. He signed. The scratching sound of ink across parchment echoed louder than thunder inside the silent room. One of the envoys quietly pushed the heavy leather pouch across the table. Ethan accepted it without counting the coins. Somehow that made everything feel worse. None of the visitors celebrated. None of them smiled. They simply folded the contract with careful precision, as though carrying something far more valuable than a business agreement. When Ethan finally gathered enough courage to ask why Blackwood Pack wanted an ordinary Omega with no title, no fortune, and no influence, the eldest envoy paused before opening the cabin door. Our king requested that she be brought unharmed, he answered. Nothing more. The words lingered long after the men disappeared into the fading darkness. Ethan stared after them, confused. Kings did not concern themselves with forgotten girls from broken families. Not unless there was something he had failed to understand. Back at the farmhouse, Claire slowly opened her eyes as the first rays of morning slipped through her bedroom window. The scent of fresh pine drifted inside with the crisp air. She smiled faintly, unaware that the world beyond those walls had already decided her fate. Somewhere beyond the border, deep within the ancient forests of Blackwood territory, Alpha King Damian Blackwood suddenly lifted his head from a council meeting, his sharp silver eyes narrowing toward the eastern horizon. A strange warmth settled inside his chest without warning, unfamiliar yet impossible to ignore, as though destiny itself had taken its very first breath. Claire slipped out of bed with the quiet rhythm that had shaped every morning since childhood, completely unaware that the life waiting beyond her front door no longer belonged to her. The farmhouse was still wrapped in the gentle silence before sunrise, and the familiar scent of fresh bread lingered from the loaf she had baked the night before. She smiled when she noticed Ethan's chair sitting empty beside the fireplace, assuming he had left early to bargain for seed or supplies in the village. It was not unusual for him to disappear before dawn. What felt unusual was the strange stillness outside. Even the chickens remained quiet, and the old sheepdog that usually greeted her with an eager bark simply watched from the porch with lowered ears. Claire stepped into the cool morning air, wrapping a faded blue shawl around her shoulders as the crisp breeze brushed against her pale skin. She looked toward the distant hills where sunlight slowly painted the pine trees with streaks of gold. For a brief moment, everything appeared peaceful enough to believe nothing could ever change. Then she noticed unfamiliar wagon tracks cutting through the damp earth leading directly toward the farmhouse. They were deeper than ordinary farm carts, left behind by heavier wheels pulled by powerful horses. Her heartbeat quickened, although she could not explain why. Before she could follow the tracks, Several figures emerged from the edge of the forest wearing dark travel cloaks marked with the silver crest of Blackwood Pack. Their movements were calm, disciplined, almost ceremonial. None of them carried expressions of anger. None spoke above a respectful tone. The eldest among them stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. "Claire Bennett," he said, "we have come to escort you." She blinked in confusion. "Escort me where?" she asked, searching their faces for answers. The elder reached into a leather satchel and unfolded the same parchment Ethan had signed only hours before. Her eyes scanned the familiar signature near the bottom. She recognized every curve of her brother's handwriting immediately. The world seemed to grow strangely quiet. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "My brother would never." Her voice faded before the sentence could finish itself. The elder did not interrupt her grief. Instead, he simply extended the document so she could read every line with her own eyes. The agreement was unmistakable. Ethan Bennett had accepted payment in exchange for transferring his sister into the custody of Blackwood Pack under royal authority. Claire stared at the ink until the letters blurred together. The cold autumn breeze suddenly felt far colder than before. Memories rushed through her mind all at once. Ethan teaching her to fish beside the creek. Ethan promising their parents he would always protect her. Ethan laughing beside her during summer harvest festivals. Every memory now carried a question she had never imagined asking. Had those promises already been fading long before today? Villagers slowly gathered along the dirt road, whispering behind cautious smiles and uncertain glances. No one stepped forward. No one protested. Some looked away with quiet shame, while others merely accepted the moment as another unavoidable bargain between stronger packs and weaker families. Claire searched every familiar face, hoping someone would tell her the contract was false, that Ethan would come running over the hill to explain everything. But only silence answered her. The elder carefully folded the parchment and spoke with gentle patience. "You may gather whatever personal belongings you wish. We leave within 1 hour." Claire looked back toward the small farmhouse that had sheltered every birthday, every winter, every dream she had ever carried. It suddenly felt less like a home and more like a memory already slipping away. As she crossed the porch one final time, hundreds of miles away inside Blackwood Castle, Damien Blackwood paused beside an open window overlooking endless forests. An unfamiliar fragrance drifted across the morning wind, impossibly distant yet unmistakably real. Without understanding why, the Alpha King quietly whispered a single word that no one nearby could hear. Finally, Claire carried only a small canvas bag when she stepped away from the farmhouse, leaving behind every object that had once made the place feel permanent. The faded quilt remained folded neatly on her bed. Her mother's teacup still rested beside the kitchen window. The tiny greenhouse she had dreamed of repairing shimmered beneath the morning sunlight, already looking like it belonged to someone else. She did not look back a second time because she feared her courage would disappear if she did. The Blackwood escort welcomed her into a covered wagon with quiet courtesy rather than harsh commands, and that unexpected kindness only deepened the confusion settling inside her heart. The wheels rolled slowly across the winding forest road, carrying her farther from everything familiar with every passing mile. Towering pines stretched toward the clear blue sky, their branches swaying gently as sunlight filtered through layers of green needles. Birds crossed overhead, while distant streams sparkled beside the trail, creating a landscape so peaceful that it felt impossible to believe she was traveling toward the pack everyone back home described with fear. Hours passed in silence before Claire finally gathered enough courage to speak. "Why would your king want someone like me?" she asked the elderly envoy riding beside the wagon. The man studied the road for several moments before answering. "Our king requested your safe arrival. That is all we were told." His voice carried honesty instead of avoidance, and somehow that unsettled her even more. She had expected threats or accusations. Instead, every answer only created new questions. As afternoon sunlight warmed the valley, they stopped beside a crystal-clear creek so the horses could drink. One of the younger guards offered Claire fresh water and warm bread without saying a word. She accepted both quietly, unable to understand why strangers treated her with more care than the people she had known her entire life. While the horses rested, she overheard two guards speaking softly beneath a nearby oak tree. They believed she was too far away to hear. "Have you ever seen the king leave the castle for anyone?" one whispered. The other slowly shook his head. "Never. Not even for allied leaders." "Then why this girl?" "I do not know. But the council has prepared the Moon Hall since yesterday." Claire lowered her eyes before they noticed her listening. Moon Hall. She had heard stories about that place as a child. According to old legends, only matters blessed by the moon goddess were ever brought before that ancient chamber. She wanted to dismiss the conversation as another rumor, yet something deep inside her stirred with quiet uncertainty. As evening approached, the forests gradually changed. Massive stone markers carved with silver wolves appeared beside the road every few miles, marking the beginning of Blackwood territory. The air itself seemed different there, carrying the clean scent of cedar, mountain springs, and cool autumn leaves. Instead of abandoned villages or signs of endless conflict, Claire saw thriving farms, carefully tended orchards, children laughing near wooden fences, and families waving respectfully as the royal escort passed. None of it resembled the frightening stories told back home. The greatest surprise came just before sunset when the towering walls of Blackwood Castle finally rose above the forest. Built from pale gray stone that glowed beneath the fading light, the fortress looked less like a prison and more like something preserved from an old legend. Elegant towers reached toward the evening sky, while silver banners drifted gently in the breeze. Claire felt her breath catch as the massive front gates slowly opened without a single shout or hurried command. High above the courtyard, standing alone upon a wide stone balcony, Damian Blackwood turned toward the arriving caravan. The instant his silver eyes settled upon the young woman stepping carefully from the wagon, an invisible warmth surged through his soul with undeniable certainty. Across the courtyard, Claire looked up without knowing why, and for one suspended heartbeat their eyes met across the fading light, leaving both of them with the impossible feeling that destiny had arrived long before either of them was ready to understand it. Claire expected iron bars, locked doors, and suspicious eyes the moment she crossed into Blackwood Castle. Instead, she found polished stone corridors glowing beneath warm lantern light, fresh flowers arranged along wide windows, and servants who greeted her with respectful bows before quietly returning to their work. The unexpected calm unsettled her more than open hostility ever could. She followed the elderly envoy through the grand entrance while dozens of members of the royal household paused only long enough to acknowledge her presence before continuing their daily routines. Nobody whispered insults. Nobody stared with cruel curiosity. Every step deeper into the castle only made her question everything she had been taught about the enemy pack. At the end of a long hallway decorated with carved wooden wolves and silver banners, the envoy stopped before a pair of tall oak doors. Two attendants opened them at once, revealing a spacious guest chamber filled with afternoon sunlight. Soft cream-colored curtains drifted gently beside tall windows overlooking endless forests. A fireplace crackled quietly against one wall, even though the day remained pleasantly cool. Fresh linens covered a neatly prepared bed, and a vase of white mountain lilies rested upon a small table beside a handwritten welcome note bearing only one sentence. "May your journey end in peace." Claire stood speechless. She slowly turned toward the envoy. "There has to be some misunderstanding," she said softly. "I was brought here because of a contract. Why would anyone prepare a room like this for me?" The elderly man offered the same calm expression she had seen throughout the journey. His Majesty gave very clear instructions. "You are to be treated as an honored guest until he chooses to receive you." Claire searched his face for any hint of deception, but found none. Before leaving, he added, "Dinner will be served shortly. If you need anything, simply ask." The heavy doors closed behind him, leaving Claire alone with silence that somehow felt heavier than chains. She wandered toward the window and looked across the castle grounds. Below, knights practiced graceful formations rather than reckless displays of strength. Children chased one another across a garden, while elderly couples strolled beneath rows of crimson maple trees. It was not the kingdom of fear she had imagined. It looked like a place where ordinary lives quietly continued beneath extraordinary leadership. As evening settled over Blackwood, candles illuminated the castle one by one until the entire fortress glowed like scattered stars against the darkening mountains. Claire had barely touched the carefully prepared meal placed before her when another knock echoed gently through the room. A young maid entered carrying a folded midnight blue cloak trimmed with silver embroidery. "His Majesty requests that you wear this tomorrow morning," she said politely. Claire accepted the garment with uncertain hands. The fabric felt impossibly soft, finer than anything she had ever owned. "Will I meet the king?" she asked. The maid smiled with quiet respect, only if he believes the time is right. After the maid departed, Claire carefully unfolded the cloak across the bed. Hidden near the collar was an ancient silver crest shaped like a crescent moon embracing a wolf. The moment her fingertips brushed the embroidery, an unfamiliar warmth spread gently through her hand before disappearing as quickly as it had come. Startled, she stepped back, wondering whether exhaustion had begun playing tricks on her mind. Elsewhere inside the castle, Damien stood alone within the moon hall as moonlight poured through towering stained-glass windows onto the polished stone floor. Members of his royal council watched in complete silence while he stared at an ancient map without truly seeing it. Every instinct he had trusted throughout his life now whispered the same impossible truth. He had searched for nothing, yet something long destined had somehow found him. Without lifting his eyes, he quietly dismissed the council for the night. The elderly advisor lingered for a moment before asking, "Your Majesty, shall we continue discussing tomorrow's alliances?" Damien slowly shook his head. His silver eyes reflected the moonlight with unusual softness as he answered, "No. Tomorrow, we speak only with our guest. Everything else can wait." The following morning arrived beneath a sky washed with pale silver clouds, and Claire stood quietly before the tall bedroom window, fastening the midnight blue cloak around her shoulders with careful hands. The elegant fabric still felt unfamiliar against her skin, as though it belonged to someone whose life had always been filled with certainty instead of questions. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts, and the same young maid entered with a warm smile. "His Majesty is ready to receive you," she said softly. Claire drew one slow breath before following her into the quiet corridors. Every servant they passed lowered their heads respectfully, yet none appeared curious or surprised by her presence. It was almost as though the castle had been expecting her long before she had ever crossed its gates. They eventually reached a pair of towering doors carved with ancient wolves beneath a crescent moon. As the doors slowly opened, cool morning light poured into the grand chamber beyond. The moon hall was even more breathtaking than the old stories described. Massive white stone columns stretched toward a ceiling painted with stars, while colorful stained glass windows transformed the sunlight into ribbons of silver and blue across the polished floor. Claire instinctively slowed her steps, feeling very small inside a place built to honor centuries of kings. At the far end of the hall stood Damien Blackwood. He wore a dark charcoal coat embroidered with subtle silver thread, and the morning light reflected softly in his silver eyes. He did not sit upon the raised throne waiting behind him. Instead, he stood at the foot of the platform, his hands calmly folded behind his back as though titles and ceremonies mattered less than the conversation about to begin. Claire lowered her gaze respectfully, uncertain whether she should bow. Before she could decide, Damien spoke in a calm voice that carried naturally through the quiet hall. "Claire Bennett." Hearing her name spoken by someone she had never met sent an unexpected shiver through her heart. She looked up, and for the second time their eyes met. The world seemed to pause. An unfamiliar warmth spread through Claire's chest, gentle but impossible to ignore, like standing beneath the first rays of spring after a long winter. She could hear her own heartbeat becoming strangely steady instead of frightened. Across the hall, Damien remained perfectly still, yet inside him every instinct awakened at once with undeniable certainty. The quiet presence he had sensed since yesterday now stood before him in unmistakable form. His wolf recognized her long before his mind could accept the impossible truth. "Mate." The ancient word echoed silently within him, carrying a certainty stronger than reason itself. Damien forced his expression to remain composed. No one else in the hall could be allowed to notice what had just happened. His council members watched carefully from both sides of the chamber, waiting for their king's reaction. Claire swallowed gently, confused by the strange connection she could neither explain nor escape. She had expected interrogation, judgment, perhaps even resentment because of where she came from. Instead, she found herself standing before a man whose calm presence eased the fear she had carried since leaving home. Damien slowly descended the final steps separating them, stopping several feet away to respect her space. "I hope your journey was comfortable," he said. Claire blinked in surprise. Of all the questions she expected, that was not one of them. "Yes, Your Majesty," she answered honestly. "Everyone has shown me kindness." A faint smile almost reached Damien's eyes before disappearing again. "I am pleased to hear that." Around them, silence settled once more, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alive, as though even the ancient stones beneath their feet recognized something that neither of them yet fully understood. From the edge of the chamber, the oldest royal advisor quietly studied both faces before lowering his eyes in astonished realization. He had witnessed many ceremonies during his long life, but never had he seen the sacred bond awaken without a single word being spoken. The silence inside the Moon Hall lingered long after their brief conversation ended, yet neither Claire nor Damien could ignore the invisible thread that now seemed to exist between them. Claire followed a royal attendant into a nearby chamber overlooking the eastern gardens while the king remained behind with his council. She welcomed the chance to breathe. Every answer she received only uncovered another mystery, and the greatest mystery of all was the quiet sense of familiarity she felt whenever Damien was near. It was impossible, yet it felt as though part of her spirit had recognized him long before her eyes ever had. Inside the council chamber, the oldest advisor finally broke the silence. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "forgive my boldness, but I have never witnessed the sacred bond awaken with such clarity." Damien remained standing beside the tall windows, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Neither have I," he answered honestly. Another advisor stepped forward carrying the folded agreement that had brought Claire to Blackwood Castle. "There is still the matter of her arrival. We have completed a full investigation into the contract." Damien accepted the parchment without speaking. Every page confirmed the same painful truth. Claire had not been captured during conflict. She had not crossed the border willingly. She had been surrendered through a legal agreement signed by her own brother in exchange for financial payment. Damien slowly closed the document, and the quiet disappointment in his eyes carried more weight than anger ever could. "Was there any evidence that she participated in this decision?" he asked. "None, Your Majesty," the advisor replied immediately. "Every witness confirms she learned the truth only after the agreement had already been completed. Those who escorted her report that she cooperated peacefully despite believing she had been abandoned." Damien lowered his eyes for a brief moment. The realization settled heavily within him. The woman destined to stand before him had arrived carrying betrayal instead of hope. At that same hour, Claire wandered through the castle gardens accompanied only by the young maid who had welcomed her the day before. Roses climbed pale stone walls while crystal fountains reflected the bright afternoon sky. The peaceful surroundings should have eased her heart, yet one question continued following every step she took. "Why has everyone treated me with such kindness?" she finally asked. The maid smiled gently before answering. "His Majesty believes that every guest deserves dignity until the truth is fully known." Claire looked down at the gravel path beneath her feet. Those simple words stirred something inside her more deeply than she expected. She remembered the silent faces in her own village as she was taken away. She remembered searching for someone, anyone, willing to stand beside her. Instead, the first place where she felt truly seen was inside the territory she had been taught to fear. As the afternoon faded toward evening, an elderly royal historian requested permission to examine the silver crest embroidered inside Claire's cloak. She willingly handed it to him, curious about its significance. The old scholar studied the stitching carefully, before his expression slowly changed from concentration to astonishment. Hidden beneath the visible threads was another symbol almost impossible to notice unless viewed beneath direct sunlight, an ancient mark shaped like a crescent moon encircling two intertwined wolves. His hands trembled ever so slightly. He immediately requested an audience with Damien. Moments later, inside the royal library, the historian carefully placed the cloak upon a large wooden table beside centuries-old records. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "this symbol has appeared only in the oldest accounts of our kingdom. According to every surviving chronicle, It marks those whom the moon goddess herself set apart long before destiny brings them home. Damien looked from the ancient pages to the folded cloak in complete silence, while somewhere else within the castle Claire stood beneath the first evening stars, completely unaware that a secret carried since the day she was born had quietly begun revealing itself at last. The castle bells rang softly the following morning, their deep voices rolling across the valley as nobles, council members, commanders, and respected elders gathered inside the Moon Hall, without knowing why the king had summoned them so suddenly. Claire stood near the entrance wearing the midnight blue cloak that had been prepared for her hands quietly folded before her, while uncertainty lingered behind her calm expression. She had been told only that His Majesty wished to address the council in her presence. She could feel hundreds of curious eyes settling upon her, yet unlike the silent judgment she had endured in her own village, these faces held patience instead of contempt. At the far end of the chamber, Damien slowly rose from his seat, and the room fell completely silent before he spoke a single word. His silver eyes briefly met Claire's before turning toward the assembled leaders. "Yesterday," he began, "our investigation into Miss Claire Bennett's arrival reached its conclusion." A royal advisor stepped forward carrying the signed contract together with the testimony gathered from every witness involved in her transfer. The advisor spoke clearly enough for the entire hall to hear. "The evidence confirms that Claire Bennett committed no crime against Blackwood Pack. She crossed our border under an agreement arranged without her knowledge or consent. She neither negotiated nor accepted any payment. She was surrendered through the actions of another." A quiet murmur spread through the chamber before fading once again. Claire lowered her eyes, feeling every painful memory return for a brief moment. But before shame could settle inside her heart, Damien continued speaking. "No person shall ever bear responsibility for another's betrayal." His calm voice carried through the hall with quiet authority. "From this day forward, Claire Bennett will not be regarded as property under any contract. That agreement is declared void within Blackwood territory." Several council members exchanged surprised glances. Although none questioned the king aloud, everyone understood the importance of what had just happened. Damien had not merely released her from a legal document. He had restored her dignity before the highest leaders of the kingdom. Claire slowly looked up, unable to hide the emotion shining in her blue eyes. She had expected freedom to come with conditions, obligations, or impossible promises. Instead, it had been offered as though dignity were something no one should ever lose in the first place. The oldest royal historian then stepped forward carrying the ancient records together with Claire's folded cloak. With careful hands, he revealed the hidden silver emblem woven beneath the visible embroidery. Gasps echoed gently across the chamber as several elders immediately recognized the forgotten symbol. "The moon crest," one elder whispered. "It truly exists." The historian nodded solemnly. "Our oldest records describe this mark only once every few generations. It appears only upon one chosen by the moon goddess before destiny reveals itself." Claire stared at the tiny symbol in complete astonishment. She had worn the cloak without ever knowing what rested against her shoulders. Damien descended from the raised platform until he stood only a few feet away from her once more. Every eye inside the hall followed his movement. He did not reach for her hand. He did not make a dramatic gesture. Instead, he spoke with calm certainty that carried farther than any shout ever could. Claire Bennett entered this kingdom believing she had been abandoned. His gaze remained fixed upon hers. "She will leave this hall knowing she stands beneath my protection, by my authority, and with the respect every honorable soul deserves." Silence filled the chamber before, one by one, every elder, commander, and council member respectfully bowed their heads. Claire's breath caught as she realized none of them were honoring a contract. They were honoring her. And somewhere deep within both their hearts, the invisible bond continued growing stronger, quietly preparing the moment when destiny would no longer remain a secret hidden only by ancient legends. Word of the king's declaration traveled beyond Blackwood Castle faster than anyone expected, carried by merchants, travelers, and royal messengers, until even the neighboring packs began whispering about the mysterious young woman who had earned the Alpha King's personal protection. Several days later, another visitor arrived at the castle gates asking for an audience with the royal council. Claire happened to be helping the castle librarian arrange newly restored records when the sound of distant carriage wheels echoed through the courtyard. Curious servants quietly exchanged glances before one hurried toward the moon hall. Moments later, the elderly advisor approached Damien with a sealed request. "Your Majesty," he announced calmly. "A man identifying himself as Ethan Bennett seeks permission to enter Blackwood Castle." Claire's hands froze around the book she had been holding. The familiar name seemed to stop time itself. For an instant, she was no longer standing inside a grand castle surrounded by kindness. She was back in the little farmhouse watching the wagon disappear with every piece of the life she thought she understood. Damien noticed the change in her expression immediately. He looked toward the advisor and answered without hesitation. "Allow him inside. Every voice deserves to be heard before judgment is made." An hour later, Ethan stepped into the moon hall wearing expensive new clothing that fit awkwardly across his shoulders, as though wealth had arrived faster than dignity. The confidence on his face lasted only until he realized where Claire was standing. She was no longer frightened or alone. Members of the royal household stood nearby with quiet respect, and the Alpha King himself remained only a few steps away. Ethan forced an uncertain smile. "Claire," he began, "I have been searching for you." Claire looked at him with calm eyes that no longer carried the desperate hope he remembered. "You knew exactly where I was," she answered softly. The silence that followed seemed heavier than any accusation. Ethan cleared his throat and turned toward Damien. "Your Majesty, there has been a misunderstanding. I came to discuss the agreement. Surely there is room to negotiate a fairer arrangement." Several council members exchanged disappointed glances. The request itself revealed more than any investigation ever could. Damien remained perfectly composed. "What arrangement do you believe remains?" he asked. Ethan hesitated before replying. "If Claire has become valuable to your kingdom, perhaps additional compensation would be appropriate." Claire slowly closed her eyes for a single heartbeat. Those words hurt far less than she expected. Somewhere along the journey, the wound had already begun healing. She opened her eyes again, not with anger, but with quiet acceptance. Damien's voice remained steady as he answered. "No person's worth can be measured by coins, contracts, or convenience. The agreement you signed has already been declared void. Claire Bennett stands here by her own dignity, not by your permission." Ethan finally looked directly at his sister, and for the first time, he truly saw the difference. She no longer stood with the hesitant posture of someone waiting for approval. She carried herself with peaceful confidence, strengthened not by power, but by respect. "Claire," he said quietly, "can you forgive me?" She studied the face that had once represented her entire family. Memories of laughter, shared harvests, childhood promises, and painful betrayal all passed silently through her heart. At last she spoke with gentle honesty. "I hope one day you forgive yourself, but I cannot return to the life that ended the morning you chose fear over family." No anger filled her voice. No bitterness remained. Only truth. Ethan lowered his head, understanding at last that the greatest thing he had lost could never be purchased back. As royal guards respectfully escorted him toward the castle gates, Damien watched Claire with quiet admiration. In choosing compassion instead of revenge, she had revealed a strength greater than any crown could ever bestow, and every person who witnessed that moment understood that true greatness had never been hidden inside the throne. It had been quietly growing within the young woman who refused to let betrayal define the rest of her life. The first full moon of winter rose above Blackwood Castle like a silver promise fulfilled at last, bathing the mountains, forests, and ancient stone walls in a gentle light that seemed brighter than any torch could ever produce. Throughout the kingdom, families gathered inside the great courtyard, filling every balcony and garden path with quiet anticipation. There were no frightened whispers tonight, only hopeful smiles carried by the cool evening breeze. Claire stood beneath the towering archway wearing a graceful ivory gown trimmed with delicate silver embroidery, while the midnight blue cloak that had welcomed her into the kingdom rested across her shoulders once more. She touched the hidden moon crest stitched inside the fabric, remembering the frightened young woman who had crossed the border believing she had lost everything. She realized then that destiny had never taken her home away. It had simply been guiding her toward the place where she truly belonged. As the royal musicians played a soft melody, Damien approached across the polished stone courtyard with calm confidence, wearing the ceremonial colors of Blackwood while the silver crest of his family rested over his heart. He stopped before Claire, not as a ruler standing above another person, but as a man meeting the woman who had quietly changed the course of his life. For several peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. Words suddenly felt far too small for everything that had brought them to this night. Damien gently offered his hand. Claire accepted it with a smile that reached her eyes, and the familiar warmth they had both felt since their first meeting quietly blossomed once again, stronger now because it was no longer surrounded by uncertainty. The oldest royal historian stepped forward, holding the ancient record that had preserved the forgotten prophecy through countless generations. He spoke clearly enough for every voice in the courtyard to hear. The moon goddess teaches that true strength is revealed not by conquest, but by compassion. Those chosen by destiny find one another not because power commands it, but because kindness prepares the heart to recognize its home. A peaceful silence settled across the gathering as Damien looked toward Claire. "When you arrived," he said softly, "you believed you had been traded away. Yet from the moment I saw you, I knew no contract could ever define your worth." Claire felt tears of gratitude gathering in her eyes. But this time, they carried no sadness. "You gave me something I had forgotten existed," she replied. "You reminded me that respect can heal wounds that fear never could." Together, they stepped onto the ancient stone circle at the center of the courtyard, where generations of kings had once pledged themselves to protect their people with wisdom instead of pride. As moonlight touched the silver crest upon Claire's cloak, its hidden symbol shimmered gently before fading into the fabric once more, as though the blessing it carried had finally reached its purpose. Around them, the people of Blackwood bowed their heads, not because tradition demanded it, but because they wished to honor the courage, kindness, and quiet resilience that had transformed an abandoned stranger into someone they proudly welcomed as family. High above the castle, the moon shone brighter than ever while the forests answered with the peaceful chorus of distant wolves carried upon the evening wind. Somewhere beyond those mountains, Ethan looked toward the same moon and finally understood that the greatest treasure he had ever known had never been measured by gold. And within Blackwood Kingdom, Claire and Damien stood side by side as the future opened before them, proving that destiny does not reward the strongest hand, the richest bargain, or the loudest voice. It finds the heart that refuses to surrender its kindness, even after betrayal. And in the end, the young woman who had once been treated like something that could be exchanged became the queen whose compassion united an entire kingdom beneath the light of the same faithful moon. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts, like, share, subscribe, enable notifications, and join us for more unforgettable alpha romance stories ahead.